What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtonette. In today's video, I'm previewing the Big 12 Conference. I'm going to be doing two parts. I'm probably posting two separate videos, but previewing this because the Big 12 season starts on Saturday, believe it or not. I won't be talking about that game in this video. This first one, I'm going to be talking about the teams. I've divided it in half based on kind of average projections, going with teams that are kind of expected to finish at the bottom half in this video and talking about whether I think they can make a bowl game and maybe by how much they improve or maybe step back this season. My next video, I'll go over more of the conference contenders and teams that I think have the best chance, give my prediction, and also predict that Iowa State-Kansas State game. But starting things out, the team that finished at the bottom of the conference last year, kind of surprisingly so, and is picked by many to finish there again this year, that's Oklahoma State. They were 3-9 last year. They need a bounce back from what was Mike Gundy's worst season ever. To get there, they're going to have to depend on quarterback Zane Flores. He's a serious playmaker, and he has a really good arm. I have a personal scouting report. I watched him play at high school here in the Omaha area in Gretna, Nebraska, so saw him play there. Obviously, we'll see how it translates to the college game. He's kind of been dealing with injuries throughout his college career so far, but it'll be exciting to see what he can do there, having watched his high school career. Some of their other guys, Rodney Fields at running back, wide receivers, Dwayne Lofton and Terrell Davis, and then tight end Josh Ford are some of the other guys to watch on offense. Defensively, they were one of the worst in college football last year, but they bring in new defensive coordinator Todd Grantham. He's had some pretty good success at the collegiate level. I think of his stop at Florida. He coordinated the Gators to some pretty good numbers. The Cowboys are bringing in a good transfer, Kyron Duhan from UTEP. He had 7 sacks last year. Along with a couple other guys, Malik Charles, and then linebacker Byron McCoy, who comes in from Akron, 120 tackles last year. They also bring in a Division II transfer, Brandon Rawls, who had 55 tackles, 3.5 sacks, and 2 interceptions from Saginaw Valley State. Finally, safety David Kabongo is another player to watch there. Their key games, they start out, I think, week 2, with a really tough non-conference road game at Oregon. Then they're also home against Baylor, at Texas Tech, at Kansas, home against Kansas State, and home against Iowa State. Honestly, looking at each of those games, I think it's possible they pull an upset in one of those, but those are all games where they're going to be underdogs, and honestly, they're probably going to be underdogs in most of their games. However, I do think outside of the Oregon game, they're going to get a couple other wins in non-conference play. I also think they do improve this season. Those defensive transfers, I think, will make that defense quite a bit better. So I think they go plus 2 wins, which means 5-7, but I do not think they make a bowl, though they do just miss out. Next up is Arizona, a team that maybe was pretty disappointing to some, considering what they had coming in last year. They finished 4-8. They had a porous defense, overall a good passing offense, of course, with Tatoe Roa McMillan and Noah Fafita at quarterback, but they struggled to score. Now, they were 114th in scoring with just under 22 points per game. They did move the ball pretty well, but they really struggled to punch it into the end zone once they got the ball moving. Noah Fafita is back this year. He's going to need to cut down on his turnovers. They nearly doubled last year. He went from 6 to 12 interceptions. That was a big part of it, and he's going to have to adjust to being without his leading receiver, McMillan. At running back, Texas State transfer Ismail Mahdi led the FBS in all-purpose yards with just short of 1,000 rushing yards as well. Wide receivers Chris Hudson and Chris Hunter III are a couple other guys that Fafita will look to pass to this year. Again, defensively, mentioned it already, that was a really porous defense last year. They bring in defensive linemen Trey Smith and T.S. Avea, along with Tay Brown, who had 69 tackles, 4 for loss, 2 sacks. Traden Stokes, Dalton Johnson, and Genesis Smith are some of the guys in the secondary to watch. Their key games, they have a really loaded schedule. When you look at the teams that are kind of projected to finish in the top half of the conference, they're home against Kansas State, at Iowa State, an important game against Oklahoma State that could be maybe for bowl eligibility. That's why I highlighted that one. Home against BYU, at Colorado, home against Kansas, home against Baylor, and at Arizona State. Obviously, they're rivals. I don't see them getting too much improvement this season. I think Fafita is going to find it difficult, especially early on, to get acclimated to being without McMillan, who was, a first-round or high draft pick by the Carolina Panthers. So I think they are even with last year. They finished 4-8 and no bowl game for the Wildcats. Next up is West Virginia. They were 6-7 last year, and the Rich Rod era is back in Morgantown. Jaheim White is in at running back. He's going to be the main guy after C.J. Donaldson left for Ohio State. Nico Marchiol or Texas A&M transfer Jalen Henderson will be the starting quarterback. If they've made a decision, I'll pop that up here on screen. And then South Carolina transfer wide receiver Cam Vaughn is one of the key guys there. White's going to get a lot of the carries this year. I think they'll probably lean on him a little bit, but we'll see how whichever quarterback wins the job steps up there. Edge rusher Jamori Robinson is a big pickup. He was the Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year at UTSA last year. And then Michael Coates at cornerback is a transfer from Nevada. I think this team, they've got a home game against Pitt, obviously backyard brawl there, at Kansas, home against Utah, at BYU, home against TCU, home against Colorado, at Houston, which is kind of a team that's kind of in that mid-range, and home against Texas Tech. I think they probably finish even with last year, though I could see them maybe taking a slight step back into that 5-7 territory, but I'm going to go with 6-6, and I think the Mountaineers do get to a bowl game. Next up is UCF, Central Florida. They were 4-8 last year, but they have a Frost watch. Scott Frost is coming back to Orlando to coach the Knights, and he's bringing in a lot of transfers, really. That tends to happen, obviously, in this era, but especially when you get a new coach. Quarterback Tavon Jackson from Indiana, kind of a backup role there, obviously behind Curtis Rourke. Running back Jalen Nixon, he had 921 rushing yards at Western Michigan. He'll be a big part of continuing that at Central Florida. Wide receivers Marcus Burke from Florida and Dwayne Thomas from Charlotte. Then switching gears to the defensive side of the ball, Amarick Kumba from Michigan State, Sincere Edwards from Pitt, Malachi Lawrence, and Nijalik Kelly, who had 10.5 sacks. So those guys are all additions on the defensive line. Linebacker Kelly Lawrence from Virginia Tech and nickelback Braden Marshall are their key guys to watch. Their key games, they're home against North Carolina. That'll be a good non-conference game early on. At Kansas State, home against Kansas, at Baylor, at Texas Tech, and at BYU. I think UCF, they kind of have a pretty big benefit of avoiding teams like an Iowa State, getting a team like Kansas at home. They have those 3 tough road games that I met, or actually 4, at Kansas State, at Baylor, at Texas Tech, and at BYU. You could probably chalk those up as losses, but I think Frost proved that he really could do a good job here. He turned around a program that I think was like 0-12 before he took over and turned them into really nearly a college football playoff contender. So I think that improvement happens again. I'm going to go with +2 wins for the Knights, finishing 6-6, and that means bowl eligibility. Next up, it's Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. They were 9-4 last year, but it's a whole new era in Boulder. No more Shedeur Sanders, no more Travis Hunter. This is a new era. Liberty transfer quarterback Caden Salter is a big pickup, though. He had right around 3,900 total yards and 44 touchdowns for the Flames last year. He will be a really good addition for the Buffaloes offense. Probably not quite up to par with Shedeur, but I think will certainly make it so it's not as much of a drop-off for sure. And honestly, he can run the ball better than Shedeur could as well, so that'll be important. Running back Micah Welch, wide receivers Omarion Miller and Draylon Miller are a couple other guys to watch on offense this year. Definitely a little different. Offensive lineman Jordan Seaton, he was their big pickup last year in the recruiting class. He leads a group that is largely improving on the offensive line. Defensively, this team improved, I would say, from the major issues they had a couple seasons ago. They bring in some good transfers. Tavian Coleman from Texas State, Jaheim Oates from Alabama. They've also got defensive ends Arden Walker and Samuel Okunlola. Then in the secondary, you've got cornerback DJ McKinney, nickelback Preston Hodge, and OU transfer Makari Vickers. Their key games, home against Georgia Tech, it's a Friday night game, week 1. Home against Boise State, at TCU. Home against Iowa State, at Utah, at West Virginia. Home against Arizona State, and at Kansas State. I think that's a pretty tough schedule. I also think it's going to be hard for them to maintain their plus 12 turnover margin. And I think the players that they had were just ultimate playmakers on both sides of the ball. I think it's natural to assume there's a little bit of a drop off this year. I don't think it's going to be anything dramatic. They're not going to go back to a 1 or 4 win team. I'm going to go with -2 wins this year for a 7-5 finish and another bowl appearance. Next up is Cincinnati. They were 5-7 last year. The Scott Satterfield era looks for another jump after a late collapse where they lost 5 straight games. Quarterback Brendan Sorsby, along with having 2 offensive lineman starters and the addition of Joe Cotton, left tackle from South Dakota, makes for a pretty good kind of continuity there at quarterback and a good addition to bolster that offensive line. Evan Pryor, running back, had 600 total yards. Wide receivers, Jeff Caldwell, a transfer from Lindenwood, which is, I think, D2 or an FCS program, and then Cyrus Allen from Texas A&M, along with a all Big 12 tight end Joe Royer, who had 50 receptions, posted some pretty good numbers. Defensively, I think, especially with this first player I'm going to mention, it's one of their strengths for the Bearcats. Dante Godfather Corleone was a first-team All Big 12 player last year. He had a big season a couple years ago, kind of followed that up last year with maybe even a better season, and he'll be expected to lead there on the line. A linebacker trio leads in the middle of this defense: Jack Dingle, Jake Golday, and Jonathan Thompson. And then in the back half, you've got safety Xavier Williams and Christian Harrison transferring in from Tennessee. That's the son of Rodney Harrison, obviously an NFL legend, mainly with the New England Patriots. For the Bearcats, they're going to face Nebraska at a neutral site. That's at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City. At Kansas, home against Iowa State, at Oklahoma State. Again, kind of one of those key matchups against one of these teams that are also in the bottom half of the conference. Home against Baylor, at Utah, and home against BYU. I think this is a team with the continuity they have on offense, a guy like Sorsby who has that experience at quarterback. Evan Pryor's got potential. I think that he could tap into a little bit more. Royer at tight end. Corleone, those linebackers, the potential in the back half. I think this is a team that I can see getting 2 more wins this time around, finishing 7-5, maybe 6-6, but I do think they get into a bowl game. Next up is Houston. They were 4-8 last year, and their offense is getting a major facelift. The Cougars finished 123rd in offense. They bring in Texas A&M quarterback Connor Wiegman, and then they have kind of a running back by committee, Rashawn Sanford II. You've got Stacy Sneed and Dean Connor. The latter of those, Connor had 1,500 rushing yards at Rice. Their top 2 receivers are Stephon Jackson and Kobe Young, and then tight end Tanner Kojal is a good pickup from Ball State. Defensively, they've got some questions at cornerback. That's going to be important. Big 12, they still pass the ball, maybe not as much as they used to. Had some good running backs last year, like Cam Scadaboo from Arizona State, among others. So the passing game is still very important. On the defensive line, Brandon Mack at defensive end, nose tackle Carlos Allen, and then at safety, Kentrell Webb kind of gives a little bit of stability there in the back half. Their key games: home against Colorado, home against Texas Tech, at Arizona State, at UCF, home against TCU, and at Baylor. I think this is a team that you can expect to see a lot of improvement with those kind of additions on offense. And I think defensively, they have some question marks, but I do think they also kind of benefit from a slightly easier schedule maybe than some other teams. You know, your toughest road game, yes, it's the conference favorites, Arizona State. You also got a team that's really being hyped up, Baylor. But you've got Texas Tech, one of these teams that's been making major moves in the transfer portal. I think I'm going to go with +2 wins. I think they finish 6-6 and do make a bowl game. Finally, the last team that's kind of in this bottom half of projection. Some teams are a bit higher on this team, and other people are a little bit more thinking they'll repeat kind of what happened last year, and that's Utah. They had a surprising downturn last year. They're bringing in, though, this year a really good quarterback and offensive coordinator pairing, which will bring a kind of rejuvenation, I think, to the Utes program in what I think is Kyle Whittingham's last year. Devin Dampier, was the top rushing quarterback among non-service teams, service academy teams. So any schools outside of Army, Navy, and Air Force, he was the top rushing quarterback. Also can throw the ball. He comes in with offensive coordinator Jason Beck from New Mexico. Those guys combined do some pretty good things there. Running back Wayshawn Parker comes in, 750 rushing yards at Washington State. They have 3 new wide receivers, all 5 offensive linemen. That's another key for Utah. You're bringing back your entire offensive line, led by Spencer Fano, one of the best offensive linemen in college football. Wide receiver Otto Tia complements tight end Dalen Bradley. So those are a couple of good players there. Defensively, this was a top 40 unit last year. Logan Fano, Jonathan Hall, Lavani Damari. The latest of those was injured for the 2024 season. Then linebacker Lander Barton, along with some key DB transfers, makes for what should be an improved Utah squad. Their key games, they got a good non-conference game, a former Pac-12 matchup at UCLA, home against Texas Tech, home against Arizona State, at BYU, home against Colorado, at Baylor, home against Kansas State, and at Kansas. That also is a pretty tough schedule. I think UCLA is a winnable game, but Nico Iamaleava will certainly make the Bruins better this year. However, they do benefit from having the teams that many have as the top 3 in the conference, Arizona State, Kansas State, and Texas Tech, all at home. So if they can steal one of those, I think Utah does get back, but I think this is a really tough schedule, and it keeps them from getting into that 9-10 win territory where they're kind of used to being at. So I'm going with plus 2 wins. That means 7-5. I think they do make a bowl game. So that shows. I mean, out of these, 9 teams, or 8 teams, excuse me. Yeah, these 8 teams, I have 6 of them reaching a bowl game. I think the Big 12 is the type of conference that's very balanced, and you could see a lot of teams finishing kind of in that 6-6, 7-5 territory. Maybe even 8-4 once I get into the teams in the next video. But that is all for this episode of College Football Talk. Again, stay tuned for my next one where I'll be going over the kind of top half of the Big 12, the teams I expect to be the main contenders, and who I ultimately think will come out on top. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.